Всем добрый день еще раз. У нас сегодня доступен перевод на английский. Нуржан, посмотрите, пожалуйста, презентацию Элины у вас на почте.
Да, включаю.
День еще раз. Так, Нуржан, я вас попрошу записывать на английском языке, чтобы мы потом могли выложить, и была возможность у всех слушать. Сегодняшняя наша 20-я завершающая дискуссия в серии «Актуальные вопросы предупреждения пыток», она посвящена как раз-таки вопросам гендера и пыток. На самом деле там 3 вопроса, они такие, скажем так, глобальные, начиная от понятия и заканчивая возможностью конфиденциальности, охраны права на частную жизнь и так далее. Но об этом подробнее скажет наш сегодняшний спикер, госпожа
Our expert, Ms. Sterneta Elina, will be giving more detailed information on this. She's professor, and she is a member of UN Subcommittee Against Tortures, and previously Elina was a member of UN Working Group. She was a chair of UN Working Group on arbitrary detentions. I would like to thank you for connecting, and Nurjan, I would like to reconfirm. Can you share your screen? And let me remind you that this meeting is one in a series starting from last year on reporting of Kazakhstan to the Committee Against Torture, and these recommendations, which Kazakhstan was awarded maybe on the 8th or 16th of May, the government of Kazakhstan sent to UN Committee Against Torture's 3 follow-ups. It's about violence and death in prisons, abusing in the army, and investigation of January events. And alternative reports were presented, and actually they are posted at the UN website. You can track back what the government and civil society is saying in return to these recommendations, and a series of discussions was initiated by few international institutions together with Kadir Kasiyet Public Association and experts, including the experts of UN Committee Against Tortures, one of which was the organization against torture based in Geneva, then was supported by International Council for Rehabilitation of Victims of Tortures, members of UN Committee Against Torture, and our leading expert, Elina Sternerte, acting member of UN Subcommittee Against Torture. Let's give the floor to the presenter, and we have interpretation available. Press the globe icon in the bottom of your screen, choose English or Russian, and very soon I will share a link with you as we have streaming on Dignity 5351 in YouTube, and then translation will be posted on the site as well. Madam Sternerte, over to you, please. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Thank you so much for your attention. My presentation will be in English, very short, and if we're all there, if you have selected the language of your preference in the globe sign, please.
Today's our discussion is a little bit different in a way. With your kind permission, as I was reflecting and preparing for today, I thought it would be very important actually to go back to the very basics, to the first article of the United Nations Convention Against Torture, which contains, as you very well know, the definition of torture. And with your kind permission, I hope I'm not going to annoy anyone. I would like to read it out, and I will tell you why a little bit later. So Article 1 of the Convention Against Torture contains the definition of torture and reads as follows, that for the purposes of this convention, the term torture means any act by which severe pain or suffering, whether physical or mental, is intentionally inflicted on a person for such purposes as obtaining from him or a third person information or a confession, punishing him or her for an act that he or a third person has committed or is suspected of having committed, or intimidating or coercing him or a third person, or for any other reason based on discrimination of any kind, when such pain or suffering is inflicted by or at the instigation of or with the consent or acquiescence of a public official or other person acting in an official capacity, end quote. I hope that you were able to notice my particular emphasis on the words consent and acquiescence of a public official. And the reason for me emphasizing these words in the very definition of torture is that so far during these 20 seminar series, well, 19 plus this one, we have been primarily talking about direct action of the state through its agents, such as police or prison officers or medical officers, for their failure to act properly to address instances of torture or inflicting ill treatment themselves, or preventing occurrence of torture by such actors as prosecutors, investigators, or judges, and so on. Today is a little bit different. If we could move to the first slide, please. Thank you. Today is a little bit different. Those concluding observation paragraphs that Madame Ibraeva mentioned at the beginning require us to focus primarily on actions of private actors through the infliction of domestic violence and violence on the basis of gender identity and sexual orientation. And this, of course, gives rise, for every lawyer in here present, gives rise to a very legitimate question. Where is the state responsibility? Because, of course, domestic violence usually takes place in private homes, behind closed doors. So how does this entail state responsibility? And what exactly, where is this link with the responsibility of the state stemming from the Convention Against Torture? And this is why I took the opportunity as all to remind us all of the definition in Article 1, because torture is not only suffering which is directly inflicted by a state agent, it is also such suffering which is inflicted at the instigation of or with the consent or acquiescence of a public official or other person acting in an official capacity. And the key term for us for these first two recommendations, which deal with domestic violence and the violence based on gender identity and sexual orientation. So this key term for us here is the term acquiescence of a public official. And that is a term which should be interpreted, as the Committee Against Torture has already explained through its jurisprudence, this term should be interpreted broadly. So in addition to inaction by police or law enforcement officials who fail to provide adequate protection against attacks based on persons' sexual orientation, for example, or indeed like racially motivated attacks, states parties are also accountable for cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment if they fail to take appropriate legal and factual measures against widespread and well-known violence by private parties. And there is a wide variety of examples. It includes corporal punishment in the family, in private schools. This is also an issue of domestic violence against women. It's trafficking of women and children certain traditional practices and customs, such as female genital mutilation, for example, into prisoner violence in places of deprivation of liberty, etc., etc. So this obligation of the state's parties to act with due diligence is part of this more general, broad organization to protect individuals against widespread human rights violations, which of course include torture and ill treatment, and also when such is inflicted by private parties. So this due diligence obligation entails a number of steps which will differ from state to state, but what the Committee Against Torture in these concluding observations has clearly indicated in respect to Kazakhstan is that first and foremost, the need to criminalize and then prevent domestic violence and violence on the basis of gender identity and sexual orientation. So firstly, the Committee Against Torture has required a specific separate crime of domestic violence to be included in the legislation of Kazakhstan. And of course, it makes perfect sense, because if there is no legal basis, no specific crime for the police to act, for the prosecutors, investigators, judges, then we all see where the lacuna arises in terms of protection and redressing instances of domestic violence. And let us not forget that domestic violence, in very similar way how we talked about torture, it's a specific stigma which is attached to the crime of torture. A very same similar idea is behind domestic violence. Why do we need a separate crime of domestic violence? Is precisely because of the same stigma which is attached to this specific crime. So it's not just assault, it's not just battery, it's domestic violence, and that needs to be recognized by the legislator first and foremost. And then secondly, in terms of prevention, if we look at the concluding observations and what the Committee Against Torture is saying to Kazakhstan in this relation, is that noting this social stigma attached to domestic violence prevalent across the country in Kazakhstan, it is resulting in low numbers of reporting instances of domestic violence. In other words, domestic violence has become somehow accepted in the community, that it is part and parcel of how society in the country functions. Now, this is a very difficult phenomena for the state to tackle, and may require the state authorities to undertake rather wide-ranging educational awareness-raising campaigns. And here especially I would like to underline the need for targeted, specific education at the police and other law enforcement personnel, as well as, of course, the prosecutors and judges. And furthermore, also the committee notes the low rate of investigations and prosecutions vis-à-vis a high number of estimated deaths and injuries resulting from domestic violence. So the need to ensure that mechanisms are in place to encourage victims of sexual and gender violence to come forward, that all allegations of violence are promptly, thoroughly, and effectively investigated, that perpetrators are held accountable, and that victims obtain adequate redress and have access to adequate medical and psychological support is underlined. And again, I think if we remember how we talked about the reporting instances of torture, that the victims need to feel enabled to come forward, you can see that the committee is taking a very similar approach to the way it is addressing those instances of torture, domestic violence, and violence based on the gender identity. The bottom line is that every allegation must be thoroughly investigated, and victims need to feel comfortable in coming forwards and lodging complaints with individual, independent, professional bodies who are thoroughly investigating these allegations, these instances of violence. And if we move to my second and final slide, the second theme of our discussion today moves away from the action of the private entities and brings us back to the direct action of the state and its authorities. As the committee expresses its concerns over mandatory reassignment surgeries, including sterilization in Kazakhstan, which is a requirement for the legal recognition of gender under Article 257, paragraph 13 of the Family and Marriage Code, as well as requiring a diagnosis of a psychiatric condition, noting lack of any psychosocial support in this regard. Now, given that this is de facto forced medical treatment, I think it is no surprise at all that the committee has required not to just amend this law, this provision, but actually to revoke it, to revoke the requirement of mandatory reassignment surgery contained in this Article 257, paragraph 13 in the Family and Marriage Code altogether. The committee has also asked the same in relation to this requirement of a diagnosis of a psychiatric condition and required Kazakhstan to establish procedures concerning the legal recognition of the gender-based on non-discrimination and on a voluntary basis, ensuring impartial counseling services and psychosocial support. There's very little, I think this concluding observation and recommendation of the Committee Against Torture is very self-explanatory and self-evident indeed. And without a doubt, it is primarily anchored in Article 16 of the Convention Against Torture, that is the prohibition of cruel, inhuman, degrading treatment or punishment. But let us not forget of the discussions we have had a number of times in the context of these webinars on how cruel, inhuman, degrading treatment and punishment may also reach the threshold of torture. And as we can see from the jurisprudence of the committee, when it comes down to such invasive medical interventions as forced sterilization, this threshold is very much often reached. So I'm going to stop here and with Anara's permission, I'll pass the floor back. Thank you.
Спасибо большое. И, пожалуйста, коллеги.
Thank you so much, dear colleagues. If you have questions to our presenter, you can ask.
Также напомню, что я направила
Let me remind you that I have sent a chat, a link in the chat to the live streaming and the content of recommendation that we are considering today. Please, if you have any questions, the floor is open. I see the staff of the academy, and I hope that you have questions. We will really appreciate your active participation, dear police officers, for carefully learning the recommendations. Please, dear participants, if you have questions about the content of the presentation, if no, then we'll accept these recommendations. I have a question. In the criminal code of our law, of our country, do we have a provision on stalking? Well, to date, the stalking is not criminalized. I know that the work is ongoing, and you have probably known that Azat Tirashev, the chair of Akjol party, has dismissed one of the deputy, and the video recording of such a dismissed deputy was circulated in mass media, and it seemed that parties take steps, but it's not criminalized yet. Yes, I have a question to Elena. My apologies, I could not comment in which countries we have this in the law or which don't. I know that many countries have this provision, but I cannot give you immediate examples. My apologies. I know, like in UK, they have it. I don't know about other countries. I cannot say immediately. So apart from recommendations that you can see in the chat, let's refresh our memory. We're considering paragraph 38, when the Committee Against Torture is expecting specific legislative and other activities to criminalize the domestic violence in the family, and the domestic or family violence versus Criminal Code of Uzbekistan doesn't, Kazakhstan doesn't have such a provision. I mean, the article, and the gender identity and gender orientation, sex orientation based violence, and having mechanisms to encourage victims of such violence to come forward. We have met with Anna Ryl today, and she was telling us a story when, since recently, Kazakhstan, more and more state crisis centers or shelters are established by the victims of domestic violence. I don't know why, but the counseling is not provided. Maybe Anna Ryl can take the floor. And the issue is that we don't see any is still there, and we have another another speaker who is going to join us, and I hope Anna and other joining experts will share their concerns, and I'll give the floor for your intervention. It's paragraph 38 of recommendation of concluding remarks by UN Committee Against Torture to Kazakhstan following the last May's reports by Kazakhstan to UN Committee. All the allegations of violence should be carefully investigated. How we can verify? If you go to Instagram account of the foundation Nemolchi.kz, Dina Ismailova, she every day makes a post on what investigations are carried out and how functional it is. And then committee says about making the responsible people liable and providing the victims the redress for the committed crimes, access to psychosocial and counseling. So I'd like to ask if Tolikan can answer which countries have provisions in their laws about stalking. Thank you so much. I hope you can hear me. It is my pleasure to see Madam Elena, who is doing a lot in this regard. I think that all the colleagues which joined this meeting today and having a better understanding on gender justice, gender equality, has not been properly elaborated in post-Soviet countries. And when victims of torture, especially women or women who stay in closed facilities, they don't get proper understanding. And at the moment of arrest, women don't really help, because gender leadership as a concept is very ambiguous. And when the UN Security Council resolution has been in place for a while and having quite successful cases. I think that Central Asia and Caucasus do not have clear understanding. For instance, if a woman comes to force authorities, law enforcement authorities, the officers, they don't understand what gender is, what is inclusivity. And I think that the growing number of cases and the victims of tortures, especially women, vulnerable groups, men, they stay suppressed by regime, which still remain after the Soviet Union collapse, post-Soviet regime, as we call it. And we can talk about international experience a lot, but I think that we need to have better understanding what is gender equality, what gender per se, what is the concept of gender based on international standards, and how these are adopted in post-Soviet countries, how it is aligned with international commitments. They are not operational at all. And when you see the number of victims, especially on the website of nemolchi.kz or in terms of OSCE commitments, when we listen to the ombudsman representatives, I think that there is a lack of understanding and lack of alignment with national standards. And of course, we need to focus on education, on outreach and advocacy. I know that Ombudsman is doing a lot. Last year, Ombudsman participated in a large-scale conference. There are attempts, but this does not depend on one authority or civil rights institutions. It is about analyzing how comprehensive approach it is. Is it multi-stakeholder engagement to gender equality issues? I can give you examples of Poland, Finland as success stories, but what system we have in place? This is where we need to think carefully, and it serves as an impediment because when they report on high-level forum, different officials, it is necessary to understand that the state structures have to have a better understanding on international commitments, international standards. So far, it remains as dilemma. Thank you so much. We have Жанна Секирбаева, Feminita. Thank you so much. Let me say that this was a hard work to receive these recommendations. It was initiated by my institution. We see a lot of violation of rights, and it is so nice to see people from police. And I would like to urge you to read carefully these recommendations and understand that we talk about human rights and accept the complaints from LGBT people who can suffer in different situations. It could be battery, blackmailing, physical violence, harassment, and so on. So I'm looking forward to better cooperation with law enforcement authorities so that you were more involved in protecting rights, i.e. doing your job properly, efficiently, and brilliantly, which you ousted when you were hired. The point is that it is very important to know the tortures against transgender people, because in Kazakhstan, we have the legal procedure, change of a marker, reassignment procedure. Janara, your sound is low. Trans people suffer from tortures, and if you need special trainings, we're open, and I'm talking to law enforcement authorities that we need more cooperation with you. Thank you so much, Janar. And we see Anaril joining us. Maybe you can answer the question if you know about which countries criminalized domestic violence and stalking apart from UK. Hello. Stalking is Finland and Canada have very large programs. Not in Kazakhstan, not in Russian Federation, not in Central Asian countries. There is no such concept, but Kazakhstan is trying to make a big stride, and we are taking measures to have this adopted in the law. Canadian experts visited Kazakhstan and they shared a lot of information on that. My apologies, I'm just driving a car. If my sound is low, just let me know. Well, in general, I thought that stalking could be a part of a new law on women and children. I wonder, why don't we have victims of sexual violence, not in terms of service delivery, nor in terms of protection of their rights? Nothing has happened, actually. Well, undoubtedly, we can give a lot of recommendations in terms of bylaws and regulatory documents and related to stalking. Thank you so much. If we have questions, we will ask you. And we have Evgenia Andreyuk. Oh, Elena, please, over to you. I see your raised hand. Thank you so much, Anara. When colleagues were saying,
I remembered about a very recent case in relation to the country of my birth, Latvia. So in July of this year, European Court of Human Rights adopted the judgment against Latvia, where Latvia actually was found in violation of Article 3 of the European Convention, so prohibition of torture, Article 8, private life, and Article 14, discrimination. Now, this case concerned an attack on applicants and his partner, a gay couple. When the perpetrators of the attack, the couple were walking normally on the street in Riga, the capital of Latvia, and the two perpetrators of the attack started to attack them with homophobic comments and slurs and physically assaulted, and the couple managed to escape by running in a shop and bolting the door so that they escaped the attack. And afterwards, they reported the attack to the police. However, the police and prosecutors declined to prosecute the attack, not the attack itself, but the attack on the basis of hate-motivated crime. And the European Court of Human Rights found that Latvia had violated the rights of these individuals, in this case, under Articles 3, 8, and 14. And because they had failed to offer adequate protection in respect of the individual's applicant's dignity and private life by ensuring effective prosecution of this hate-motivated attack against these individuals. And I think what was very interesting, and here if you just give me one small minute, the court made a very important statement here. And here I'd like to quote, if I may, that such attacks as this humiliate and debase the victims, conveying a message of inferiority of their identities and expressions. And as such, this was the basis for making the finding under Article 3, prohibition of torture, against Latvia. So this goes back to what we were saying and what the previous speakers were also alluding to. When we are talking about such hate-motivated, gender-based motivated attacks, there is a very specific stigma attached to such attacks. People are being attacked because of their gender, because of their sexual orientation, because of who they are. And that's a very specific stigma attached to such crime, which need to be met by the specific response in the legislation, in the investigation, in the prosecution, and in the judgment. And that is the stand of the European Court of Human Rights. Thank you very much.
Спасибо большое.
thank you so much. next paragraph that we're referring to, it's paragraph 39 and 40 of concluding remarks by UN Committee Against Torture, and they are titled Violence Against Individuals Because of Their Real or Assumed Sexual Orientation or Gender Identity. And this is why we have our guest, Evgeny Andriuk. She represents the International Organization Against Tortures. If you want to share your views, Madam Andriuk, paragraph 39, the committee is concerned about the cases of violence against individuals because of their real or assumed gender or sexual identity, including the civil rights activists who work against discrimination on such crimes. And the government has to take measures to prevent such violence. And as Madam Tolikana Sanalieva said, it is important to understand what awareness-raising campaigns are organized, how comprehensively it is provided, and this should be based on real and assumed sexual orientation. However, we don't have any case in Kazakhstan where impunity would prevent it when the guilty verdicts were issued. There was a case, a transgender was killed a couple of years ago, and we don't know if any verdict was issued. And the Committee Against Torture state that it should be operational, impartial, and objective, and perpetrators should be prosecuted and victims should be redressed. Evgeny, if you can hear us. Yes, I can hear you very well. I'm on my way back. And well, I don't have anything particular to share, but I'm sure that Elena has shared her experience. And from our side, we're happy that committee focuses to these groups. And the Committee Against Torture was one of the conservative entities without proper focus to vulnerable groups. This was kind of allegations, but now reading the concluding remarks, we are happy to know that this practice is changing, and there are special provisions which are in a very detailed manner explain and indicate the standards they should be implemented by the state. And I think this has been already discussed, but the Committee Against Torture in its practice related to domestic violence with regard to authorities, they never regulated, and there is no systematic policy to prevent this nor investigate it. And the Committee of Torture qualified as torture against women, and probably we need to focus more on this, that individuals can also file their allegations and prove that this is a torture, both in terms of domestic violence and other vulnerable groups with similar logic, as Elena demonstrated in the case of UN Court for Human Rights. So having this consideration by Kazakhstan in the UNCAT, that respective authorities take necessary response measures, and it is important to know that concluding remarks contains very detailed recommendations. Like 10, 15 years ago, it was not as clear as in our in human rights advocacy aspect, and based on follow-up recommendations, I'd like to say that if you have any insights to share, maybe you have 1 week or 2 to submit your recommendation before the deadline for the concluding remarks. Thank you so much, Evgenia. And we have Galina Moisenko. She was asking to take the floor. Please, Galina, over to you. Galina, can you hear me? Let's move to another paragraph. Legal recognition of gender that we talked about. 41, paragraph. Anara. Dear participants of this meeting, I'm using my phone and it was difficult for me to understand where to press the button. Let me talk to you about the criminal prosecution as a way to protect children from stalking. And laws can be different in countries depending on the legal tradition, cultural features, but let's have a look how it happens in large countries such as United States. Stalking is regulated on the federal level and individual states. The first law related to stalking was adopted in California in 1990, and 50 states federal laws included stalking as a crime, including online cyber stalking. Sanctions differ from fine to imprisonment depending on the severity of a crime. United Kingdom, one of the first in EU, adopted a law which was aiming to fight this phenomenon, and they have criminal responsibility for stalking, and it could be physical stalking and online stalking. They have fines and imprisonment up to 5 years. In Germany, they have a law with criminal responsibility for stalking in 2007, and if it entails threat to health or life of an individual, and depending on the severity, the punishment can vary, and similar incrimination is in other EU countries, so it could be repeated stalking to control the behavior of a victim. It could be 3 years of imprisonment with very big fines, and terms of sentence depend from country to country. In Italy, they have 4 years, up to 4 years of imprisonment. In Japan, they have a law was adopted 2000 after some high-profile cases related to stalking. The law covers different stalking, including physical stalking and cyber stalking. The 1 year of imprisonment or a fine. In India, the criminal code was adopted in 2013 by adding an article related to criminal liability for this crime. It is up to 3 years of imprisonment for the first time and up to 5 years for the second crime. In 2021, in Russia, they have adopted a law with criminal responsibility for crimes the insistent stalking. In Kazakhstan, we don't have a separate law on stalking, but some of the forms can fall under the code of article of criminal code about slander or violation of privacy. And there is a trend in amending this law globally, and probably we will have this improvement as well. In conclusion, let me say that many countries introduced this provision on the stalking to protect their citizens from violation of their privacy, but the punishment depends on severity, and it should be considered as a severe one, especially in the digital era, as it is violating someone's privacy. Thank you so much, Galina. Let me also stress the implications, how such cases of violence can end. It's a death of an individual, and for this we have other international standards. And you know, the Committee for Human Rights on Article 6 has adopted a number of general concluding remarks, of which number 36 says that I would like to focus the attention of our policymakers that immunity, amnesty for perpetrators who committed intentional killing, their superiors, which de facto are aware of the happening, are incompatible with their duties and cannot be commensurate with any redress. And this is what we're talking about, because in terms of consequences, we need to go on a case-by-case basis. Also, let me stress that there is a committee on liquidation of discrimination against women. It is UN committee which undertakes and accepts different documents. And there is another document, General Recommendation number 5, General Recommendation number 35 about gender violence against women, which is aiming to update the General Recommendation number 19. It is rather new document dated 2017, which gives a lot of details on the commitments of a state, including opinion jurists. The concept of inacceptability of violence against a woman is becoming the standard, and this served as a catalyzer to restart the process of development of international standards. I see other participants are joining, but let me go back to recommendation number 40 by UNCAT to Kazakhstan about the need to take measures to prevent violence on the actual and assumed gender identity, and any crimes should be carefully reviewed, and victims should get proper redress. And Janar Sakirbayeva was referring to this as well. If you have any comments or insights, the participants, please unmute yourself, take the floor. It is open, and we can give you a chance to talk. My attention was caused by the phrase by real or assumed or contemplated gender identity. Maybe the person still doesn't know, or the person is perceived as such. These are two characteristics in this meaning. If you don't want to share your concern, we can go to the next paragraph. Legal recognition of gender. Paragraph 41 has been raised. It's about Article 257 of the Code of Family and Marriage, and the committee is concerned about the mandatory reassignment surgery, including the serialization under Article 257, which should be associated with the diagnostic of mental disorder and lack of psychosocial support in this regard. And it gives recommendations. Recommendation is very specific. The committee has to cancel the government has to cancel the requirement on the obligatory reassignment surgery and about diagnostic of mental disorder, because the World Health Organization in its standards excluded reassignment surgery from the mental disorders. And having the gender legally recognized based on non-discrimination principle and provide necessary counseling and psychosocial support. Another moment, Russian Federation because of the WHO changing or revoking, this Russian Federation started boycotting this process, and I don't know, maybe some of the participants are more informed than us, but to the best of my knowledge, boycott ended with ICD-11 being amended and thus creating a lot of dissatisfaction on the side of Russian Federation. And Jana Arsakerbaeva is commenting that sterilization is and recognized as torture. We had our past when people with mental disorders were subjected to sterilization, but you might know that there was related to certain conditions, and some of the conditions were recognized like risky for the individual and the society, and it is about exclusion by the World Health Organization of certain requirements. And I have a floor to give to Madam Chernobyl. As for the legal recognition of gender, I think it is worth referring to a study that we did together with Almaty Q, initiative of transgender people. And thanks to Almaty Q, this recommendation came to existence, and the issue of legal recognition in the Code of Family and Marriage, and it's about a change of documents, and surgical manipulations are required, which would entail full sterilization if we follow the rules required by the bylaws. And this sterilization was recognized by the treaty bodies of United Nations as torture, and this requirement is a violation of the right to freedom from torture. And Almaty Q is very productive on this area. As for ICD-11, Kazakhstan, to the best of our knowledge, is in the process of recognizing this version of international disease classification, and being positive, it can be adopted next year, but we are not sure when exactly. If you have any question about legal recognition of gender, you can talk to me, and I'm working on this with Almaty Q. Would you share the gist of this recommendation? So what is the legal recognition of the gender? As you brought up examples like United States, more than 110, 111 or 128 different genders. So what is the foundation of your recommendation? because of violence. This requirement of surgical correction is the torture, and from the perspective of national standards, the need to change the documents, gender marker, changing the gender marker is in the document, what we call legal recognition of gender. And for such a recognition, a legal recognition of gender, the surgical manipulation, which result in the irreversible sterilization, is a part of this concern. In Almaty province, by the guilty verdict, one of the transgender was recognized guilty, and Ministry of Interior and the prison committee had a question where to accommodate this individual. And if you know how this transgender was accommodated in the prison, I mean, was it a prison for men or for women, which implications it had, and why still in the Code of Criminal Procedure we don't have such provisions for the rules of treatment of such prisoners. Tatiana, would you like to take the floor again? Yes, Janar knows this story, this case, and she can just correct me if I'm wrong. Well, we cannot talk about transgender people. Is a transgender man or transgender woman, but we talked about transgender woman, and she stayed in a female prison, which is accurate, but due to some prejudice and unbiased attitude and treatment and harassment, she was repeatedly subjected to a bigger part of her term. This transgender woman stayed in the health facility, but she is released now. She's okay. But in terms of accommodation of transgender people in prison setting, well, this would need some clarification in the Code of Criminal Procedure or Penal Code. So this people should serve their sentences in respective prisons for men or women. Thank you so much for clarification. Janar, you raised your hand, please. Yes, let me take the floor. I'm not in the office, and there is some noise in the street, but let me add this change, the legal changing of a gender, as we worked with Almaty Q. It raises when a person needs to change the document. When a person understands what is her or his gender with full responsibility and wants to change, then these policies of state enter into play. Transgender people, in exchange of their documents, should give up their bodily independence in order to be properly employed or have a bank account or cross the border, migration services, and so on and so forth, where they request documents. This is where we have an area or zone or a sphere or air, space, how do you call it, where it is necessary to demonstrate to asking people the documents which match the gender. If the documents mismatch, and this is the opportunities for donors, for state bodies to violate the rights of the transgender people. They were asked to undress themselves, demonstrate their private areas, private parts, and this is discrimination, and this should not happen. And this legal recognition of gender is very necessary. It is critically important for trans people so that to live a normal life, live in the community. This is my message to deliver today. Thank you so much, Anara. Can I take the floor? I'd like to add what Janara was saying. By the way, and this is yet another reason why transgender people, because of these bloody requirements, cannot fulfill these requirements. There could be some counterindications for medical manipulations, surgical manipulations, and a person may not fulfill this requirement of the law in order to change the document. And eventually, and what Janara was talking about, without having documents which match your appearance or gender, they cannot be employed, I mean, in the job they want to be working. And many transgender people, they work as sex workers. And this is one of the reasons why they go for sex industry. And there are so many transgender people as sex workers. And one of the reasons is that they cannot change their documents. Yet another requirement of the code about health of people and healthcare system in 2020 they raised an age from which all the processes can be launched from 18 to 21, and this is a discriminatory approach because other grounds to change the documents in the Code of Family and Marriage in Article 13 and all other so any change of document can be launched from the age of 16, but from the gender point of view, any change of document would start from the age 21. So it's Article 257 of this code is about possibility to change the document. It is titled Change of Name, Patronymic, and Surname, and there are certain grounds under which people aged 16 or older may file to respective authorities to change their name, surname, and patronymic. And the paragraph 13, it's about transgender people, which reads, they can change voluntary, but this voluntary or this discretion is heavily governed by the state. This should be improved. I see Galina Moisenko asking for the floor, please. Dear Anara, thank you so much. I have two questions to ask. I'd like to ask this question to Elena. If you know this topic like gender, I'm sure you know that the implementation of international treaties vary and only part of countries have integrated these requirements into their national laws, especially on gender identity. Majority countries of Middle East, Africa, Asia, they did not include the gender identity into their law or directly prohibit any manifestation which go beyond traditional gender phenomenon. And I have a question. The more you dive into the implementation of international treaties, the better you want to understand how countries, like individual countries, are selected for the concluding remarks by the committee. Let me explain. As for anti-discriminatory legislation, this requirement was presented to 15 countries out of all members to international treaties. So how come that it is Kazakhstan was selected to push forward the gender issue? It's question one. And question two, quite general in nature. Let me say, I want to understand how the lawmaking process is set up in the committee. Okay, from the moment any international convention is
рекомендациях
adopted.
появляется некая интерпретация.
I think that there should be certain interpretation of the requirements which the state have to fulfill. So part of the countries are leading or are on the front line, and it appears it's like a trial of some of provisions in order to then implement them in other countries. Thank you. Thank you. I hope you understand my question. No, I didn't quite get your second question, but let me start with the first one.
I'm going to speak in English because that is easier for me. So how are countries picked for review, and why is it that Kazakhstan is being picked, and these elements in terms of gender identity are being asked of Kazakhstan? I mean, for all of the countries, all states parties to Convention Against Torture, there is predictable reporting cycle. So Kazakhstan is being picked according to the cycle. There is nothing specific about Kazakhstan or any other countries. So you can look at the calendar on the Committee Against Torture website, and you know when the country is due for consideration. So it is not about picking on Kazakhstan in relation to any other countries. When it comes down to which issues the committee is specifically asking, when country is coming up for a review, and this is across all of the treaty bodies, with exception to the treaty body that I am part of, the SPT, because SPT does not consider state reports. So when all of the other UN treaty bodies are considering a country, they are having a very broad look at the issues concerning the heart of the convention. So in case of the Convention Against Torture, the Committee Against Torture will be examining a plethora of issues which are invoked, triggered by the obligations that Kazakhstan has undertaken in relation to Convention Against Torture. And of course, it involves issues around gender identity and around the rights of the LGBTIQ plus persons. And it involves issues of domestic violence. It is without a doubt. Now, when the committee also, what it does is that all of the civil society organizations are invited to make submissions to Committee Against Torture, because of course, Committee Against Torture runs its sessions in Geneva. It doesn't carry out visits to Kazakhstan to ascertain of what's happening on the ground. So it is also dependent upon information which is submitted to it, first of all, through state report, but then there is also an opportunity for the National Human Rights Institution to submit reports, and any civil society organization can submit reports and draw attention of the committee, saying that this particular issue is a problem in Kazakhstan because of this and this, and it triggers responsibility of Kazakhstan under Article so-and-so of the Convention Against Torture to make these submissions. So this all information comes to the Committee Against Torture, who usually designates 2 country rapporteurs among its members, who examine all this information. So information submitted by the report. It also, the Secretariat of the CAT sort of summarizes information from other UN treaty bodies, special procedures, what have these other UN mechanisms found in relation to Kazakhstan, in relation to Kazakhstan's obligations under Convention Against Torture. And then you also have these civil society reports, some civil organizations which are based in Kazakhstan, some international human rights organizations. All of this information is being synthesized by the country rapporteurs. And then you have the actual hearing when the state report is being considered in the presence of your authorities, who are actually looking at these issues, who actually have the opportunity to present. And the Committee Against Torture is asking the country rapporteurs, and then other members as well, ask questions, and then these issues are being discussed by the committee, and then the committee's members decide which are the most pertinent issues to be included in the concluding observation. So there is no specific something in relation to Kazakhstan as opposed to other countries. I didn't quite understand the second question, I'm afraid.
Да, вы не поняли первый вопрос или второй
Uh,
вопрос?
Мне кажется, что я только что ответила на
Второй
первый
вопрос.
вопрос, не так ли?
so second question, right? Well, I was not quite clear about your second question. Let me explain. So we see that the provisions of the convention and interpretation over the past 10 years has changed. Some key they add. I just want to have better understanding. I want to get your opinion. How this process happens on this particular topic related to gender. What are the prospects and what is the trends? Because countries which were first to adopt these provisions, and then there would be need to clarify, because these provisions, they change within the committee, UN committees. Sorry, how realistic it is?
First of all, let me remind you that I'm not a member of CAT. Right, so this is my personal opinion as opposed to opinion of the Committee Against Torture or indeed of the SPT. But I think the question that you are asking is absolutely fundamental, in fact, basic question of international law. Any norm of international law develops over time. There is nothing unique about Committee Against Torture. There is nothing unique about the understanding of the Committee Against Torture vis-a-vis gender identity, sexual orientation, etc., etc. Everything's developing. In my previous intervention, I gave you an example of a judgment against Latvia, my country of my origin, in relation to harassment, hate crime against 2 gay men. And Latvia was found responsible. That judgment was unthinkable 10 years ago. There is nothing, and does that mean that the European Court of Human Rights was wrong with it? No, no law, and that also goes in your domestic law. Your understanding of legal understanding of every term develops with the society, with the norms, with the practice, because new situations in life arise, our horizons, our moralities, our thinking, our recognition of people's differences arise, and that needs to be reflected in law. And of course, in the domestic law, we have an opportunity a little bit easier to change laws, to enact new laws. In international law, when you have to negotiate new conventions among 193 states, it's a very difficult process. I mean, let's have a look at the current process around crime of aggression, for example, convention, or Convention on Crimes Against Humanity, or indeed the new Convention on the Right to Development. It's a very difficult process. In the national legislation, we have more opportunities, more flexibility, but even then we know how difficult that is to do that, to reflect that societal change in the law. So in terms of, I actually have this, there is a bit of a negativity when the international experts are being, shall we say, criticized for interpretation of the treaty. It is not interpretation of the treaty, it is reading the treaty in the current situation of development of rule of law and democracy. And the fundamental principle of non-discrimination simply dictates that that is done.
Спасибо, Элина. Здесь еще 2 руки
Thank you
есть.
so much, Elena. I see 2 more hands, maybe answers to the questions. Жанна Арсикирбаева and Tatiana Chernowol. It's not about interpreting by individual committees or individual members. It's about living in a world where you cannot ignore LGBT people. If they advocate for their rights, we have to take this into account. We have brilliant human rights activists. They could be advocates or activists who produce alternative reports, who, like yourself, spend resources to take mission to committees and submit their report on time and make a presentation in front of the members of the Committee Against Torture. Committee cannot close their eyes. There was no gender as a term in academia or science, similar to the women's rights. It's about inclusivity, about intersectionality. We cannot ignore the violation of rights of LGBTQ people. And this is why the committee is receiving such information. And the committee has to recognize, and committee selects this particular country for careful review. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Tatiana. Well, if we talk about experts, talk about legal recognition of gender in high-level fora such as UN, I can refer to the document by Almaty Q about gender identity with clear information. The special rapporteurs of UN made some interventions, and one of the rapporteurs didn't have anything related to LGBTQ. It was the rapporteur on the extreme poverty who visited China once, and there was such a concern and recommended China to get rid of the discriminatory and torture-based provisions on gender identity. Special Rapporteur Juan Mendes, he called this practice as violating the right to freedom from torture. And when the Committee Against Torture recommended this to Kazakhstan, as Janar was writing in the chat, it was a product of the human rights activists and other supporters of LGBT community. I attended their meetings and we raised this issue in our dialogue with the members of the committee, and in the alternative report this is reflected. And the committee heard the voices of human rights activists and civil society. Transgender people agreed, and let me remind you that there was opinion by international human rights mechanisms, be it European, regional, European, international, like UN. Everything is quite logic and consistent. And Kazakhstan was not subject to special attention of UN. No, it's not the case. Thank you so much. Let me remind you that our discussion is about to conclude. Let me summarize, because every discussion concludes with some recommendations, more thought for thinking, and some educational component as well. We want our laws to be harmonized with international standards. And let me remind you once again that today we talk about violence from different perspectives related to gender, to women, domestic violence, children, elderly, and many others. And the Committee on Liquidation Against Any Tortures and Violence Against Women had its recommendation 35 about gender violence against women when updating the previous recommendation number 19, and paragraph 6 reads a very good comment that gender violence is a common phenomenon which takes different interlinked forms and shapes within the private and public sector as well, especially in the light of technological response, and it goes beyond national borders. And the Committee of Liquidation of Any Forms of Discrimination Against Women says that to a larger extent the laws and regulations are either insufficient or do not meet the necessary requirements. And this is justified by the traditions, culture, religion, or ideology of fundamentalism, and reducing the state funding for such mechanisms. And it is related to the stringent economy measures. And you know very well, according to the International Covenant of International Social Cultural Rights, the government may not refer to the lack of funding in order to provide the freedoms and rights of individuals. And this undermines the capacity of state to take necessary measures. And paragraphs 37 and 42 of the concluding remarks of the Committee Against Torture are focused on fighting against violence. In the context of narrowing down the democratic space and resulting tension with the rule of law, result in the manifestation of gender violence in domestic environment and LGBT community in general. And this lead to a creation of culture where impunity becomes a norm. But we don't want impunity to become a norm in our society, because we know how escalation of violence results: violence in family, violence in schools, like bullying or violence in the streets, some protests and violence between the groups in the government or fight for power. And we know a lot of stories about armed conflicts. The escalation of violence should be prevented, and every measure that Committee Against Torture is taken against Kazakhstan should be carefully be implemented. Dear colleagues, after carefully listening to think tanks and experts and colleagues, I was listening to very carefully, including Miss Elena. Kazakhstan and the government has to carefully look at the multilateral approach to fighting impunity and violence. In France, when there was a case of violence against children, they understand that it was the nation guilty for this, and they had large-scale national discussions, which resulted in a text which read that we cannot live this way anymore, because our future generation will be dull, will be doomed. And as Anara said, the world is changing. It's not possible anymore to work in a classical way, and the processes can be impeded. There are a lot of issues, but reforms are ongoing. And having such good and brilliant recommendations that we were talking about, starting with Madam Elena or other colleagues, the government of Kazakhstan, with plenty of resources, has to demonstrate its political will in fighting the impunity and tortures, because you started discussing, and you have been discussing for a few years, the draft law on equality and against discrimination, which Tatiana Chernobyl was talking about. I think that the key draft laws that would give a new spirit, new vision and value, coming back to values, very high in the agenda these days. I'd like to wish you best of luck, but unless there is a political will by the government and authorities with an equal and horizontal participation of experts like yourselves, we need to get success. I would like to wish you best of luck. And for concluding remarks, I would like to invite Ms. Chinerte. Please, over to you. Thank you, Anara. Thank you, dear colleagues. It was my pleasure to attend this event. I would like to thank you for your interest, for high appreciation of concluding remarks, concluding observations of the Committee Against Torture. I fully agree with Ms. Kolikan that the political will is the foundation for anything, and the state, which is based on
И это фундамент демократии
It's a
страны.
foundation for democracy in a country. Political will should go hand in hand with all these fundamentals of democracy. I would like to thank the civil society organizations who work with UN committee, special procedures, treaty bodies, because without you, our job would be very much complicated. Thank you so much. See you soon. Bye-bye. Thank you so much, dear speakers, Madam Steinerta, Madam Ismailova, Andreyuk, our colleagues from Kazakhstan. Today we talked about paragraph 38-42 of the concluding observations of UN Committee against Torture to Kazakhstan on the violence based on gender and domestic violence. So there is still so many pending issues, but the key is to have it criminalized. The second block related to the violation against individuals because of their gender or sexual orientation and legal recognition of gender. I would like to thank experts who helped us better understand the content of this recommendation, and there should be mechanisms which Committee Against Torture is talking about. As a matter of fact, there are no mechanisms that would encourage the victims of sexual violence to come forward, to file their complaints, to report, and this should be carefully and objectively investigated, and perpetrators should be made liable. It's about fighting the impunity. The victims should be provided with proper compensation, access to medical, legal, psychological assistance. I would like to thank our interpreter who was helping us, Zhana Ustimirova, and I would like to call this meeting closed. Please watch and share with your colleagues on Dignity 5351. Dear colleagues, can I ask a clarification to Galina Moiseyenko with your permission? Just 1 second. Let me ask our interpreter because her time is up.
Пожалуйста, Татьяна.
Please, Tatiana. Galina, you said that recommendation about adopting the law on protection against discrimination was referred to 15 countries out of 193, and you learned this experience. Did you carefully learn every concluding observation? If yes, then which treaty bodies? Did you really intentionally learn against which treaty bodies issued such a recommendation? Galina, can you hear?
Вас очень плохо
The
слышно.
sound is very low.
Вы как-то прерывисто говорите.
Unfortunately, the sound is very unstable.
Галин, прошу прощения, вас не слышно вообще ничего.
We cannot hear you. We cannot
Я
get
что могу
anything.
сказать? Я
Okay.
слушала, как Галина выступала в одной из рабочих групп по
I heard
вопросам
Galina speaking in the meeting of one of the working groups about the need to adopt a comprehensive anti-discriminatory law in Kazakhstan. Yes, this is the second time when I hear that only against 15 countries such recommendation was made by the treaty bodies. But it's not about having Kazakhstan in this list. It's about having this concern domestically, which should be addressed. And I think we should not be just talking. We should be acting. We should stop talking. As we live in an independent country, with 30 years of history, we need to address this domestically. Can you hear me? It's about education, it's about training. We need to have a very comprehensive, multifaceted engagement, multi-stakeholder engagement. We talked to Anna Ril that victims of violence never received any support, including in the shelters. We heard we had recommendations from OMCT. You can file your alternative reports. How well government implemented 3 follow-up recommendations. Everyone has a right. Every organization, every civil society has a right to do so. Today we have heard that LGBT people, we heard about domestic violence, which can also be considered in the Committee Against Torture. We have heard explanation of recommendation on the legal recognition of gender. We received reference to different laws and regulations. And from you, Galina, about experience of foreign countries, about stalking. From Ms. Steinerte, we have heard, apart from keynote presentation, we know how countries are selected. So there is a cycle, and it's openly posted on the UN website. And finally, let me stress that we didn't talk much about the victims of domestic violence, but I come back to the concluding remarks of my own. Let me stress that Dina Tansari is doing a great deal of work, and unfortunately, she's suffering from the heart attack. She's visiting a doctor right now. But let me focus your attention that there are still many pending issues, and many of them have not been addressed yet. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to interpreter for working over hours. Anyway, thank you so much. Bye-bye.